Hey, good afternoon and welcome back. It's Radio Cayman's Talk Today program. 1-800-534-TALK is our toll-free number if you want to join the discussion. We have the distinct privilege of welcoming to the studio Mr. Peter Hayes, the Director of the FCO's Overseas Territories Directorate. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to meet you and to have this discussion. Hopefully those listening, in particular our voters, will pay special attention and understand that we have equal access not only to our politicians but our, where the country takes a keen interest in good governance and in the economic as well as social prosperity and harmony of our country. So welcome to Radio Cayman, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. It's my second visit to Cayman Islands. As you say, I'm in the Foreign Office in London and I have responsibility for our relationship with all of the overseas territories. But sitting behind my desk in London, you never really know what's going on. You need to come out, you need to meet people, you have to listen. My intention in this visit, it's only a brief visit, but I'm trying to see lots of different people, of course, politicians, government, opposition, but also community groups, ordinary people, to get a sense of what's on your mind, what folk are concerned about, to hear from myself the sort of issues you're facing.
Indeed, and I certainly like how you stress that, of course, politicians. I mean, it's unfortunate we have to put up with them, but anyway, they're part of the breed, right?
No comment.
No. I must share that we may take for granted the access to which we have our local politicians, and for those who've never been in that role, probably don't quite appreciate the demands and the frustrations. But we live in a society that there's some safety and stability, and sense of security. When we look at the way we are in relation to what is happening in our country, we look at economic challenges across the globe. Perhaps Portugal may now sort of come out of that murder that it was in once, and the EU would be good again. But even here at home, we see the challenges. From the UK's perspective, what are the main concerns that it wants for its territories?
Well, I think you're right that there has been a global wake-up call, because I think right across the developed world and the developing world, I think we've basically been living on debt. In fact, the Chinese Vice Premier put it very well when he said the West has been living on debt since the Second World War, and the sleeping pill has been cheap debt.
Cheap debt.
And so we've all been living beyond our means, as governments, as countries, and as many individuals. We've been taking on more and more debt. And I think the wake-up call we've all had has been very uncomfortable, that we have to not just rely on debt, not just rely on consumer spending to get us out of recession, but we have to start being more creative, more productive, more competitive. And there's no easy way out of that, and it's difficult. We have to build capacity. We're having to do that in the UK. We're having to rebalance our economy towards more productive areas of the economy, not just services, but productive areas of the economy. We're having to upskill. We're having to invest in training our young people to be able to do the jobs to get us into the 21st century economy. And that's a challenge every community is facing. And the additional challenge that you have here and in many of the other overseas territories is that when you're in a very small community, that's even more difficult because you have a limited pool of people. You've got to find that talent, you've got to grow that talent, and you've got to broaden your economy. And one of the exciting things I've seen as I've been here is the way that you are broadening the economy. We have the new health centre, there's new development, there's talk about new development, lengthening roads and new golf courses, and it's very exciting. And I think that it's a tough road. There's no quick light bulb, there's no quick switch just to suddenly transform the economy. We have to build it up, we have to drag it up, and we have to do it the right way by investing in people and skills and technology and know-how, not just by sort of somehow borrowing our way out of the problem. So those are the sort of challenges you face here, we face in the UK, most countries face. And I think the key thing is to work together, to work with your friends and allies, to try to find ways to do things together, to learn from each other, and to always strive to be better at whatever we're doing. And that's part of what we've been discussing here, is learning from some of the good lessons that you have here in the Cayman Islands about being more efficient and more effective, but also sharing some of our experience. And that's part of what we're trying to achieve.
Let me say, as you listen to some of the words that you shared, almost sound as if we're looking at the private sector enterprise. But government itself needs to embrace some of those same philosophies, those policies, those things that have made the private sector effective and efficient and profitable.
Absolutely right. Government is a vital part of this. We have to, government, generally speaking, government doesn't generate wealth. Wealth is generated by business, by industry, that creates new jobs and creates new products and creates new services to sell. Government is the enabler for that. Government's like the life support system. It has to provide the plumbing. And you need that plumbing to work, and it's got to work efficiently, and it's got to work. It's got to be good value for money. It's got to give the customers what they need. The customers might be the ordinary citizens who need healthcare and education and support and law and order and all of those things. But it also needs to support industry and business who want to set up business. They've got to be able to trust the regime. They've got to be able to understand the jurisdiction, how it works. They've got to be able to trust the rule of law. And that's one of the great advantages you have in the Cayman Islands, is that people do trust the way things are run here. Stable, well run is important, but striving to do ever better is really important. Crucially, making sure that government focuses on the things that only government can do, and really focus on that. And I know the Premier referred to this in this State of the Nation address, about really looking hard, and no sacred cows, and really looking hard, what are the things that only government can do, and let's make sure we really do those well and efficiently. Then there are other things that we can do as well, fine, but let's really get the core things that only government can do right and get it done efficiently.
But increasingly we're recognizing that in this new paradigm that there are things that traditionally may have been reserved for government only. Education, healthcare, policing, for instance. Increasingly, some of those things are being taken on by the private sector, effectively, with government taking a lesser role. Is that something that we should perhaps look at as well as we develop this 21st century government model?
I think it's absolutely right that you look at all of these things. And these are things that, as you say, people will have been used to the way things are done. But that doesn't mean to say that's the way it has to be done forever. And I think this can sometimes be uncomfortable for communities. Are we comfortable with somebody else running our airport? Or do we expect the government to run it? These are things that communities all around the world are having to face up to and say, look, if we've got the government doing anything, these are the things we really want them to do. That's not to say that the government shouldn't care about how other services are provided. Even if the government itself is not providing them, the government is responsible for the way the country is run and the territory is run, and whether people are getting the support and the services they need and they can expect. Now, that doesn't mean so even things that have been privatised doesn't mean to say the government washes its hands and say we're not interested anymore. So I think, but this is something that the community has to work through with its politicians to say, what are we comfortable with in terms of changes?
Speaking to Mr. Peter Hayes, the director of the FCO's Overseas Territories Directorate, and basically generate good governance, an efficient, effective society that has elements of stability and security. Now, for a government to achieve some of those things of which we speak, many would say immediately we're looking at perhaps downsizing the physical numbers, perhaps maybe eliminating certain services in order to be more efficient and to align the strategies. Are those things necessary?
Well, I think it's right for every organisation, whether it's public or private sector. Every organisation has customers. Somebody is paying for every organisation. Nothing is free, so somebody is paying for it. So I think every organisation owes it to those customers to really look hard at itself and to say, are we running ourselves as efficiently and effectively as we can? Are there things that we don't need to do anymore that either somebody else can do, or we can pay somebody else to do it, or we can just opt out and not do it any longer? I think we owe it to the customers because they're the ones who are paying for this. And the opportunity cost is that if they're paying for these services, then there isn't the money to pay for a different service. And so if we're having that discussion about what the priorities of the community should be and what the priorities of the politicians are, they get voted in on the basis of their promises of where they're going to focus their effort. You can't do everything. And so we really have to look hard at saying there are lots of things we could do, all of which might be worthwhile, but which are the real priorities?
So from that perspective, then, government should look at being profitable, if only under the economic model where it's a zero profit. Should it be profitable in its operations?
Well, I think you have to take a broader definition of the word profitable. It has to be good value for money, and the value that you add as an organisation has to be seen by your customers as worth the money they've put into it. Now, you could say that is a kind of profit. It's not the same as a bottom line corporate profit, but I think the same approach of having that real discipline about saying, are we doing the best we possibly can with the resources our customers are giving us?
So an economic profit as
and
opposed to an accounting profit.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Hayes, we do have a few callers join us as we go to the phones. Perhaps those who wish to join us is 1-800-534-8255 with dollar headsets. And we go to the phones. We're speaking to Mr. Peter Hayes, the director of the FCO territory. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon to you and to your guest, Dwayne.
Afternoon, sir.
First, I welcome the guest in Cayman Island. I think it's good to hear somebody from the Foreign Office in Cayman. And I really want to have a comment about the issue of transparency and accountability and all these sweet things the Foreign Office try to accomplish. But I think the Foreign Office themselves is not practicing what they preach. When the issue of Tambura, I don't know if your guests have idea about the issue of Tambura, but that show that the Foreign Office is not transparent with us, not open with us. Why the issue, those documents from Tambura not be released to the general public? It's
fair enough, sir. If you would, perhaps that question, I mean, transparency, some would say lead by example, don't say one thing and do something else. To the caller's question, sir?
Well, I think on the specific issue of Tempura, this is before the courts. I'm not going to comment on something which is before the courts. There's legal action underway. It would be completely wrong and inappropriate for me to comment on that. I think the broader principle of transparency is part of what we were just talking about, is a part of your accountability. What is it you're doing with the resources that you're given by the public? And can you account for that, and can you show that you're putting it to best use? I think that's a very noble and a very important principle of democracy, that people should know not necessarily everything. There are issues in national security and in policing that you can't have complete openness for obvious reasons. But I think the principle of transparency is a really important one in terms of giving people trust in their elected leaders, in their government, and in their public service.
No, with that in mind, and we're looking at good governance and transparency and financial prudence and accountability, from the UK's perspective, is Cayman on the right path? What things more can we do in order to ensure that we are, prudent, that we are viable, and we have a sustainable economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I take, for example, the financial services changes, I think Cayman has absolutely been in the vanguard of embracing the changes in transparency in the financial services industry. And this is something which our Prime Minister, in the context of the G8 presidency last year, focused that as a result of the banking crisis and concern about multinational companies moving money around the world, and there was a lot of concern about the pain that has been caused around the world in terms of recessions and job losses and austerity as a result of the banking crisis. And our Prime Minister focused on the fact that his sense, and I think a growing sense around the world, is that there is a demand for change and to see more transparency, particularly transparency to tax authorities and transparency to police, to make sure we're ensuring that the financial system is not being abused by criminals to launder money and so forth. And that, I think, has seen a real change in the attitudes towards transparency in the financial services. And I think it is hugely to Cayman Islands' credit that both the government but also the industry has got itself absolutely onto the front foot in this debate, both in terms of embracing some of the reforms, in terms of openness to exchanging tax information between tax authorities, but also in terms of making its own arguments for why the Cayman Islands model is right and is justifiable and defensible. And I think that's really, really important. So I think there's a good example there of how the world is starting to move on in terms of what people think is acceptable, and Cayman Islands has got itself absolutely onto the front foot.
Now, when we look at the things that are going to make us viable, sustainable, we see a number of issues that are staring us straight in the face that may, according to some, may have never been addressed adequately or properly or consistently, whether it's education or healthcare, but in particular, no pun intended, the burning issue of the dump or Georgetown landfill, that whole issue of an effective, efficient, modern waste management facility.
Yeah.
What should we do if you were to ask the advisors?
Well, I think, it's absolutely right that you need to grip this issue. This is true in many communities around the world, that waste has just been treated as unimportant. And literally the level of sophistication of waste management is you stick it in a valley somewhere, or you stick it in a hole somewhere. And all of the sort of problems that you've started to see here with it burning, and concerns about the health impacts as well as the environmental impact and the flies and the vermin and so forth, is something which is catching up with communities all around the world. And the only way to address that is to bring some real political and, I'm afraid, some resource to bear on it to get it right, to get a proper minimization of waste, to make sure we're not packaging things in a way that creates a lot of unnecessary waste, educating the consumers in terms of recycling and not just throwing everything into the trash and it all going off to landfill, and then managing that trash properly in terms of incineration and minimizing the amount of waste. So there's a whole series of things that and it's just a matter of sort of catching up with all of the good practice that's been developed over the last 40, 50, 60 years. And you're not alone in having to do that. And I think actually the fire has, in a good way, has focused people's attention that the current state of affairs is not acceptable. Now, getting out of that is going to take time and effort. It needs to be properly planned. It's a big exercise. And I think the Premier referred to this, that this is not something that's going to change overnight. You can start changing it overnight, but you're not going to finish changing it overnight. And that's an important process, and particularly for small island communities where you just don't have the space to have big landfill dumps because your territory is so small and so precious. It's even more important that you bring that real modern thinking to bear on how to deal with waste.
As they say, sometimes you want something to achieve, you have to light a fire under it to get it going. Maybe this is the instance. But you also mentioned resources as well as political. Now, political will, there are those who would share that if, for instance, there was a better opportunity, a better siting, a better method, that there may be insufficient political will out of fear of the re-election process mightn't go according to what is in that district's interest relative to what is in the national interest. With that in mind, would we be in a position to say, just as a hypothetical, if we identified location A to be the most viable, the best suited location, but the residents were, not in my backyard sort of mentality, that the UK could lend some resources, as you spoke of, to encourage the citizens to look long term, look beyond our own selfish agendas?
Yeah, well, listen, NIMBYism is something which happens in the UK just as much as anywhere else.
We see with the airport, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, and we're very happy we've already offered the Cayman Islands government help in waste management, and that includes the sort of managing the politics of it, managing the social aspects of it, as well as actually managing the waste itself. But at the end of the day, this is something which the Cayman Island community themselves have to grapple with. Because and it's an uncomfortable thing. Nobody wants this waste facility at the back of their house. Nobody's going to want that, but it's got to be somewhere. And I think as a community, I don't think this is an issue which can be solved from outside. I think the community has to recognise, and this is where community leaders, politicians, but other community leaders, have to come together to say we collectively have got to grasp this nettle. And we've got to find a way that is right for all of us. And some people are going to be happier or less happy with the solution, but we have to find a solution. And that's something which I don't think you can bring from outside. That has to be the community itself. You can bring some of the technological know-how from outside, but at the end of the day, the community has to grapple with this and find a way forward.
So political leadership, a political will, as it were, in order to attain the best objective long term.
Yeah.
Mr. Hayes, we do have another caller joining us, sir. Good afternoon. Welcome. You're on Talk Today.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you today?
I'm just fine, and welcome to the Cayman Islands to your guest. I'm not sure if he's been here before.
His second visit, sir.
Second visit.
Official, anyway.
All right, good. So he should know everybody nearly. Sir, listening to you for the last, 15 minutes or so, and I'm not sure when you're leaving, so I just wanted to get this in. On the matter of the development that is taking place in Cayman, physical development, a bone of contention and a red flag that has been, in my mind, but yet still not a red flag seems to be government and the financial side of it, is that the population growth in the Cayman Islands between 1970 and 2006 was the highest growth rate of any country in the world at 428% during that period. And we are aware of that fact. Are you aware of that fact, sir?
I am now.
Okay, well, ask for the Pedley report.
Okay.
And Mr. Dwayne can contact me if they don't give you a copy of it. It was produced for Cabinet in 2007. As a result of that, we had massive demands on infrastructure with that many people coming in so fast, doubling every 18 years our population was during that period, growing exponentially. And follow that through 2023, 2024, 25, somewhere around that, we'll see a situation where the Cayman Islands population will be over 100,000, if they allow it. Certain developments are coming in that are slated to require massive amounts of imported labor. And I know from an immigration standpoint, the United Kingdom is now going through different issues because of the massive immigration and the damage to your culture, which we have seen here, which causes the crimes, they break down the reference points that people had and no longer culturally and physically. But I'm dealing with the finance side of it. When we had the massive development, physical development that took place, we never had in place and still do not have in place any form of valuing what the amount of infrastructure will be used up by a particular physical development, hospital, hotel, warehouse, golf course, condominium, as an example. Each one, a home, apartment buildings, each one uses up different forms of infrastructure.
Right. Now, in the interest of time, sir, because we only got a few minutes, perhaps...
Right, I know, sir.
Yeah.
I won't give him the background.
Yes, sir.
And the matter of costing that out. Now, the public management and finance law and the framework for fiscal responsibility or rules-based fiscal budgeting, as it really is, I'm surprised that still there doesn't seem to be the move towards, when development is being considered, to actually calculate, well, how much is this development going to result in the need for infrastructure? That is, use up what we already have in capacity or require additional capacity. What is that cost? And where are the funds coming from to pay that cost as development takes place? We didn't do it, hence we have 500, 600 million in debt right now,
yes, sir.
Unable to fund the pension plan for civil servants and all the other things that we have.
All right.
But it's not addressed. Do you believe that the physical cost of what is going to be occurring as a result of development should be accounted for, and then the operational cost of that development to government once it's in place, and that those fiscal numbers should be reported and accounted for and earmarked so that we really understand? I like the move that has been moved on the golf course going up east. That's a beginning in that direction. But that is only one aspect,
right.
One small aspect of infrastructure that new development is going to use up.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the call, sir. Thanks very much for that. Mr. Hayes, if you wish, sir.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. I agree. I think, and I think we're seeing the building blocks for this happening now with the fiscal framework, with the National Conservation Law, with these other measures, which requires a much broader look at development prospects in terms of environmental impact, in terms of strain on existing resources, whether that's housing or roads or water and so forth. And I think that looking at these issues in the round is absolutely essential. I think many countries, and I think the UK has not been immune from this at all, many countries have just looked at investment opportunities as they've come through the door. This project comes through the door, do we like it, yes or no, that's it. Wait for the next one to come through. And I think the problem with that is that you will then end up finding that you've allowed development which somehow stops other development which you might have preferred later on because a piece of land has been sold or because of the way that limited resource is being used up. So I think it's absolutely right that when you're particularly, again, in a small community where there's a limited amount of space, limited amount of land, limited amount of resources, that you look very hard at a community, at these sort of development opportunities in the round, and you take that broader holistic view that I think you're suggesting into account. Who's actually going to work there? Where are they going to come from? What are the skills that are required? What are the infrastructure impact that this development is going to have? Otherwise, you end up having something which you think is very valuable, but actually is less valuable than you had originally thought.
No, Mr. Hayes, perhaps the most pressing question of, given that we're looking at literacy and encouraging education, how does a gentleman with a PhD in nuclear physics end up in what could be a political environment?
Well, there isn't a quick answer to that question. I think the key thing is to leave oneself open to unexpected opportunities in life, I think is the best way of answering that. But I would, if I may, just like to say, as I should have done at the start, but just to say this is my second visit. I've been very pleased about how welcoming everybody has been and how friendly everybody's been. And the fact that we've been able to have discussions about very serious issues. I mean, I'm not suggesting we always agree on everything or these issues aren't difficult, but to be able to have the discussions in a very mature and friendly and professional way has been a real pleasure. So thank you very much to you and to the listeners for that.
Well, thank you for making yourself available and perhaps on your next visit, as we would extend the same to your predecessors. Come on and let us have a chat in order to be able to access our public much more. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Peter Hayes, the Director of the FCO's Overseas Territories Directorate.